Welcome to PokerStrategy.com, your professional poker school. In the video about pre-flop basics, you already learned which principles you should follow before the flop. Since these principles are rather dynamic, and therefore dependent on many factors, it is relatively difficult, if not impossible, to represent them in a chart. That's why this video will deal with several examples in which you have a playable hand and there has been no aggression before you. This means that your opponents have either limped or folded. To keep things simple, we will assume that all players sit at the table with a full stack, i.e. 100 big blinds or $25 respectively. This video will show you why you raise, what behaviour you can expect from your opponents, and how you should react to further action. Let's start out with the question how you should play very strong hands before the flop. You are aware that if you have pocket aces or pocket kings, your goal is to go all in, if possible, before the flop. But what do you do with pocket queens, for example? How do you play very strong hands? With pocket queens you will occasionally find yourself in difficult situations pre-flop. That's why we'll now analyse 4 examples in which you have queens in UTG. Of course you raise first in. You want to extract value from weaker hands and protect your hand. You're at a short-handed table where you have reads on 3 of your opponents. However, most of these reads are stats, which is why you can only roughly categorise your opponents. The cutoff seems to be a rather loose passive player who you consider to be a calling station. The button appears to be a rather loose aggressive player and you can often expect action from him. The small blind seems to be a tag who plays few hands. However, the hands that he does play are played quite aggressively. Unfortunately, the other 2 opponents are unknown. You have certain expectations after your first in raise. You can roughly predict which moves your opponent will make. The cutoff will call relatively often. If he raises, however, you have to keep in mind that even though he is very loose, he has a PFR of 12, which rather corresponds to that of a tag. Therefore, his range shouldn't be too big. However, it is somewhat difficult for you to precisely specify his range since he usually plays in a rather uncoordinated way. As far as the tag is concerned, it is reasonable to expect that he only 3-bets very good hands and otherwise stays out of the hand. A 3-bet from him when he's in the blinds is not really something you want to see. What you know about the lag is that he will 3-bet with a very wide range and that you are very often ahead against your opponent. So what are you hoping for? In this situation it would be ideal if the cutoff cold calls and the button makes a squeeze. To squeeze means making quite a big 3-bet after a raise and a cold call. You can easily 4-bet in this situation and go all in pre-flop. The cutoff calls your raise, which doesn't really surprise you. However, you get a squeeze from a relatively tight player. Not a very pleasant situation. The small blind does not have position on you and saw that you raised from UTG. This means he is likely to put you on a relatively tight range, which means you should respect the raise even more. On the other hand, this is a profitable squeeze spot for him. He has probably seen that you raise quite often in the past and are able to open raise small pocket pairs or speculative hands from early position. He has probably also noticed that the cutoff is very loose, so he might feel compelled to collect the dead money in the pot and try to get your potential small pocket pair to fold. His line of thought is a good one. After all, you are now thinking about folding the 3rd strongest hand. You have 3 options, although you should only consider folding in very few cases. Your queens are simply too strong for that. You have position on the small blind, so a call would be an option. The only problem is the cutoff, who would simply call too often and put you in a difficult situation on the flop if you play 3-handed. If you decide to 4-bet, you made the decision to go broke pre-flop. Naturally, the small blind will only push with very strong hands.